Brittney Griner body-checked Caitlin Clark twice. The referees watched it happen both times and swallowed their whistles. If you remember the past 2 seasons, Griner has been doing the exact same thing, so this is not new behavior. What is new is that Clark finally said something about it after the game, and she did not soften it. She broke her silence and did not hold back against what she sees as a pattern of officiating that has failed to protect her. The Fever won 85-75, but Clark is done staying quiet about what it took to get there. Caitlin Clark was getting grabbed the entire game and did not get a single free throw. Not one. She also took a hit to the lip and had a bloody lip going before any of the controversial calls even happened. And she still balled out. 25 points, 10 for 17 shooting, 5 3-pointers. This is the best version of Caitlin Clark we have seen. Let us start with the free throw line because that number tells you everything. Clark finished this game with 25 points and 0 free throw attempts. Not one. She drove into the paint. She got bumped coming off screens. She absorbed contact on pull-up jumpers. And the referees found 0 reasons to send her to the line the entire night. Connecticut, meanwhile, shot 9 free throws, several of them on contact that looked lighter than what Clark absorbed without a whistle ever being called. The technical foul situation is where the officiating becomes genuinely difficult to defend. Clark picked up a technical during the game and the league itself later changed that specific call to a team delay of game foul. The WNBA reviewed it, determined the official got it wrong, and quietly corrected the record a few minutes after the fact. That correction matters because Clark already had one technical from earlier in the game, and if that second technical had stood as originally called, she would have been ejected. That would have been the first ejection of her career, in a game where she was absorbing constant physical contact without a single foul call going in her favor all night. The league's own correction confirmed what Indiana fans could see watching the game live. Griner's screens were a separate and equally significant problem. A legal screen requires a set position, feet planted, body still at the moment contact happens. What Griner ran for most of the night was the opposite of that. Feet still moving, hips rotating directly into Clark's path, initiating the contact herself rather than absorbing it. The officials let every one of those instances go uncalled. These were not borderline judgment calls that could go either way. Griner caught Clark in the face with an elbow on one specific screen action, the kind of contact that typically draws a flagrant foul review on most nights in this league. The officials looked directly at it and swallowed the whistle entirely. Connecticut's free throw trips kept the Sun competitive in this game on possessions where Indiana arguably should have been the team at the line instead. The Fever built a lead as large as 11 points and could not extend it further, partly because turnovers kept handing Connecticut extra possessions, and partly because these uncalled fouls kept resetting the Suns' momentum at exactly the moments when Indiana looked ready to put the game away. Clark noted after the game that one mistake kept turning into 2, a missed shot becoming a turnover becoming an open layup for Connecticut on the other end. Clark played through all of that and still finished 10 of 17 from the field. The technical that the league reversed the following day was not a minor officiating error buried in a long list of calls. It was the clearest single example of what the entire night looked like from Indiana's sideline. Griner has reportedly been doing this to Clark for 2 seasons now across 2 different organizations, and the basketball community has noted that officiating crews have repeatedly let it happen. By this point in the rivalry, it should not have been surprising. It still generated significant reaction regardless. Go back to the previous season when Griner was playing for the Atlanta Dream. She hit Clark with what looked like a full shoulder body check, not a screen, not incidental contact, but a deliberate hit that would have drawn a foul call on essentially any other player on that court. The officials missed it in real time. Griner then fouled out of that game, walked off the court, and cameras caught her appearing to direct comments toward Clark from the sideline. No fine was issued. No suspension followed. The league reviewed the situation and determined no further response was necessary, which sent a clear signal about expectations heading into every future matchup between these 2 players. So on June 13, Griner ran a similar pattern. The first incident came on a screen action where her feet were still moving at the moment of contact, positioned wider than shoulder width, which is close to the textbook definition of a moving screen and one of the more straightforward calls in basketball officiating. The officials watched it happen and called nothing. The second contact was more direct, a shoulder driving into Clark's chest that stopped her movement on the play entirely, the kind of collision significant enough that officials standing directly nearby should not have been able to miss it. They called nothing on that instance either. And in a separate sequence where contact appeared to originate from Griner toward Clark, the officials called a foul on Clark instead, which says something about which direction the whistles were consistently pointed throughout the night. What Griner's physicality accomplishes beyond the individual contact itself is disrupting Clark's timing coming off screens. Clark does her best work when she can use her speed to create separation, catch the ball in rhythm, and get into her shooting motion before the defense recovers position. When a defender is allowed to physically interrupt that movement without consequence, Clark has to work significantly harder for every look she gets throughout the game. She still shot 10 of 17 and went 5 of 10 from 3, so she found a way through the contact, but she earned every one of those baskets while absorbing physicality that arguably should have sent her to the free throw line on multiple occasions. Slow-motion replays of the contact circulated widely afterward, and the breakdowns were detailed enough to show exactly where each instance of contact began and why it likely warranted a whistle. The officials did not have the benefit of slow-motion review in the moment, but they had the actual play happening directly in front of them and still called nothing on either instance. The box score from June 13 reads almost like an error when you look at it closely. Clark shot 10 of 17 from the field, went 5 of 10 from 3, scored 25 points, dished 5 assists, and attempted 0 free throws. Not one. Those are not numbers you produce by standing at half court and settling for jump shots. Clark drove into the paint repeatedly, ran two-man actions with Aaliyah Boston, and finished through contact in the lane on multiple possessions, and the officials found nothing worth a whistle in her direction the entire night. Let us talk about how the scoring actually broke down because the three-point shooting alone deserves attention. 5 threes on 10 attempts against a Connecticut defense that spent the entire game specifically scheming to take away her perimeter looks. That is 50% shooting from 3 in a professional game where the opposing coaching staff knew exactly what was coming and prepared specifically for it. Clark opened the game by answering an early Connecticut run with a deep step-back 3 followed by a driving layup, which set the tone for how she operated the rest of the night, mixing the long ball with attacking the rim and absorbing whatever contact came with it. Boston's double-double anchored the other half of what Indiana built in this game. 13 points and 11 rebounds, with her offensive rebounding specifically generating extra possessions that Connecticut could not afford to give up. The two-man action between Boston and Clark still does not have a clean defensive answer around this league, and Connecticut did not find one either. Kelsey Mitchell put up 19 points and added 5 assists, which on most nights would be the performance everyone is discussing after the final buzzer. Mitchell attacking off the defensive attention Clark draws is exactly what this offense is designed to produce, and against Connecticut it generated enough offense to help push Indiana's lead to 11 points at its widest margin. Monique Billings deserves recognition as well, 10 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 blocks as a starter, doing physical work in the paint that rarely shows up in highlight packages but consistently shows up in the final score. Her 2 blocks against a Connecticut team pushing hard into the paint flipped possessions at moments when Indiana needed exactly that. The turnovers are the one number in this game that complicates the broader narrative. Clark turned the ball over 6 times and the team's total reached 19, which is significant. Indiana committed 5 turnovers in the first quarter alone and Connecticut scored 10 points directly off those mistakes. So a lead that could have reached 15 or 20 points instead stayed around 11. Connecticut never actually retook the lead, but they kept the margin close enough that Indiana never got to manage the game comfortably from a position of total control. Clark scored 25 points without a single free throw attempt while driving and finishing and absorbing contact throughout the night. Commentators watching live noted she appeared to be getting grabbed and hit the length of the court without a whistle being called. That observation is not a subjective judgment call. It is simply what the box score shows when you line it up against the contact visible on the broadcast. And even with that performance, Indiana still needed someone to step up late in the game to close it out. Sophie Cunningham missed the previous game against the Chicago Sky with what the team officially listed as right elbow soreness. She returned against Connecticut and scored 11 points in the final 2 minutes on 4 of 5 shooting, The elbow appeared to be functioning without any visible issue. The timing of her earlier absence is what generated ongoing conversation among fans. The speculation traces back to a previous game against the Washington Mystics where Clark hit a buzzer beater, and the celebration that followed had a chaotic, unscripted energy to it. Cunningham's role in that specific moment drew attention, and one game later she was unexpectedly out with elbow soreness. Coach White has not confirmed or denied any connection to a suspension. Cunningham has not addressed the speculation directly either. What made Clark's post-game comment notable is that when a reporter asked about Cunningham's performance, Clark smiled and said that Cunningham has a new elbow, then offered a knowing look. That comment sent fans back to the buzzer beater footage and reignited speculation about what actually happened between those two games. Whether White sat Cunningham down as a message about team structure or the elbow soreness was genuinely the reason, Cunningham returned against Connecticut playing with clear intensity. Connecticut had been chipping into Indiana's lead, turnovers kept handing the Sun extra possessions, and Indiana needed someone to stop the bleeding quickly. Cunningham checked into the game and hit 3 consecutive three-pointers and a layup, all within an 11-0 run that effectively buried Connecticut for the remainder of the game, finishing 3 of 4 from 3 in just 18 minutes of total court time. That is not the profile of someone easing back into game action after time away. That is someone who had been sitting and was ready the moment her number was called. What makes Cunningham difficult to replace alongside Clark is not complicated to explain. Clark draws so much defensive attention that the moment a defense collapses toward her, someone on the perimeter needs to be ready to fire without hesitation the instant the ball arrives. Cunningham does not hesitate. She also plays with a physical edge that matters significantly on a team that spends most games absorbing contact officials are not consistently calling, because Cunningham is not the type of player who backs down from moving screens or physical contact directed her way. After a knee injury last season cost her a significant chunk of playing time, her continued availability has been a real point of concern for this team, and returning to drop 11 points in 2 minutes against a desperate Connecticut defense answered those questions about as directly as a single performance could. Clark creates the initial chaos, draws 2 defenders, forces defensive rotations, and Cunningham converts the resulting open look before the defense can recover. That sequence is not an accident. That is a closing lineup Indiana can genuinely rely on when a game tightens in the fourth quarter, and it worked exactly as designed on June 13th. The Fever won 85-75, extended their winning streak to 3 games, and improved to 8-5 overall with a 3-1 record in Commissioner's Cup play. Clark was still visibly frustrated when she walked into the post-game press conference, and she did not wait for a reporter to steer the conversation toward officiating. She raised it herself directly, and she named a specific official by name on camera. Players in this league rarely do that because the league can fine players for public criticism of officiating, and Clark is aware of that rule as well as anyone in the league. She did it anyway. She specifically addressed the delay of game technical, the same call the league reversed the following day. Clark had accidentally kicked the ball off the scorer's table while attempting to retrieve it, and the official assessed a technical foul for it. Her stated position was that the call made no sense in the context of the game and that it felt unnecessary given the situation. That is not the language of someone simply venting in the moment. That is the language of someone who calculated what a potential fine would cost her and decided that speaking publicly about the pattern was worth it regardless. The broader picture extends well beyond that single technical foul. 0 free throw attempts across a full game of driving and contact. A technical foul that the league itself walked back the following day. Moving screens that went uncalled throughout the night. Connecticut shooting 9 free throws on contact that in several instances appeared lighter than what Clark absorbed repeatedly without a whistle. Clark chose her words carefully in that press conference, but the words she chose pointed directly at a larger pattern rather than at one isolated bad call. Coach Stephanie White's own post-game comments added another layer of tension to the same room. She pushed back firmly on reports of internal team discord, characterizing certain outside narratives as irresponsible, which is a separate conversation from the officiating complaints entirely but contributed to an atmosphere where the basketball itself became a secondary topic. White did briefly acknowledge Clark's 25 points and 5 assists in passing before moving on to other subjects. Fan reaction split in a predictable way. Clark's supporters pointed directly at the box score and argued the numbers speak for themselves. Critics countered that she was deflecting attention from 6 turnovers, which is a legitimate point of its own, but 6 turnovers does not explain a full game with 0 free throw attempts, and that specific gap in the numbers has been difficult for anyone to fully reconcile. Clark has not historically discussed officiating with this level of directness. She has fielded questions about disputed calls throughout her career and consistently given measured, diplomatic answers. What she said after the Connecticut game was less measured than her typical responses. It read as 2 seasons of accumulated physical contact and missed calls finally being addressed directly and specifically in a public setting. 8-5 with a 3-game winning streak, and the Fever are achieving that while Clark absorbs significant contact that is not consistently being called and still producing 25-point performances. Boston is producing double-doubles. Mitchell is scoring efficiently off the attention Clark draws. Cunningham is closing out tight games in a matter of minutes. Billings is contributing rebounding that does not always get highlighted. Clark has now strung together back-to-back 25-point games for only the second time in her career, which places her firmly back in broader MVP conversations regardless of how much attention that receives. Every opposing team in this league has now seen her produce 25 points on 0 free throw attempts against a physically aggressive defense, and she found a way to win regardless. That combination of production and resilience is the part opposing coaching staffs have not yet figured out how to game plan around.